You know, one of the weirdest moments for me in regards to music that I love was watching the MTV Icon performance of Avril Lavigne playing the song Fuel by Metallica. Something about that moment felt wrong. You have this generic pop singer that came across like she was genetically engineered to try to appeal to Green Day fans, trying to perform a song by Metallica, one of the greatest metal bands of all time. It was like the corporate machine was trying to imitate something with a soul. Imitation is not always the sincerest form of flattery. When you don't understand what made the original thing special, the imitation ends up being an insult instead. That is what Trigun Stampede feels like to me. It is an imitation of something that is truly special that ends up missing the point of what made the original so unique and so interesting in the first place. So, let's go ahead and review this new anime and discuss why I hate this damn thing so much. Now, to really explain why I despise Trigun Stampede, I have to talk about the original. Trigun is probably one of the two most notable anime to ever be on Adult Swim. Both it and Cowboy Bebop were the first two that were ever featured on there. And you couldn't have picked two better choices. Both shows really show the depth that anime could be as a genre and as a storytelling medium. On one hand, with Cowboy Bebop, you had this groovy, spacefaring noir story, and on the other, you had a space western that featured a gunman with a .45 revolver who refused to kill anybody. Now, I do love both shows, but Trigun, of the two, was the one that has become one of my favorites since those days. Love Bebop too, but Trigun for me is just, mwah, chef's kiss. If I was ever egotistical enough to think that anybody cared about me doing a top 10 list of my favorite anime of all time, Trigun would probably be number 2 or number 3. The original anime was done by Studio Madhouse, who also made another one of my favorite anime of all time in Black Lagoon. Trigun stars the character of Vash the Stampede, a blonde, spiky-haired gunman who is shockingly nice, carries a very large magnum revolver, and not only is he a pacifist, but anytime he shoots his gun, he does so in a way that will save life, as opposed to taking it. Now, it probably wouldn't surprise anybody if I told you that the creator of Trigun, Yasuhiro Naito, is a big Spider-Man fan. Well, I should say it's probably not a surprise if you've seen the original series. There's a lot of similarities between Peter Parker and Vash the Stampede in regards to their morals. Then, of course, a lot of his art style was influenced by Todd McFarlane. I think the heaviest that it comes in the anime is the episode Diablo, which I will mention more than once during the course of this, because in my opinion, it's the second best episode of Trigun next to, I think, the last 3, all combined. Though, goddamn, the last half of Trigun is just, whoa, it's peak! It's peak, I tell you! But that's where Monev the Gale is introduced. And if you can't tell by looking at him, spell his first name backwards. Yeah, he's inspired by Venom, my favorite fictional character ever. Now, being a big Spider-Man fan myself, it's probably a big reason as to why Trigun vibed with me so well. Now, I would love to do a full video about the original anime, but I want to finish reading Trigun Maximum first, just so I can have a good grasp of the similarities and differences between the original source material and the anime. So, let me just roll through the basics of the original series real quick. The original Trigun, of course, stars Vash the Stampede, as I mentioned. It takes place on a planet called Gunsmoke. Vash is being tracked by 2 insurance agents named Meryl Strife and Millie Thompson. The story follows their adventures together as you slowly get to learn about the past of Mr. Stampede and the dark shadow that he's constantly moving away from that slowly catches up with him as the show goes on. Of course, it gets more interesting when you get to meet my second favorite character of the series, Nicholas Wolfwood, who is awesome. Gotta love a gun-toting preacher. A big thing about the original show is that it had style for days, alongside a ton of substance. It managed to create this unique sci-fi world that was just as inspired by spaghetti westerns, and you couldn't pull yourself away from it. It feels like the creator was writing as many love letters as possible to science fiction and to westerns while creating something that was wholly unique. There's a reason that Trigun is one of the most beloved anime of all time here in the West. And that's why I got skeptical when I found out that a remake was going to be made of it. Or rather, I should say reimagined, because Trigun Stampede feels nothing like the original, even though it's trying to operate on a similar wavelength. Normally, I'd like to do the old compliment sandwich thing with this show, but I don't know if I'll have anything positive to say after this starting bit. The nice things I will say is that the English dub is actually pretty good, especially considering that they got Johnny Young Bosch to return as Vash the Stampede, who, oddly enough, I think was his first anime character that he ever voiced. Now, they didn't get anyone else to return to their old roles, which sucks, but granted, some of those VAs have sadly passed away, and things of that nature. But one thing I will give credit to is specifically the guy who voices Legato Blue Summers, because he actually does a really spot-on impression of the original VA. But still, it's overall good VA work, despite the material they were given. And I'll also give Studio Orange credit that the animation's not bad for being CG. It comes across as a lot less janky than many of the other things that I've seen before in the past. Berserk 2016, anyone? I don't think I'm ever really going to enjoy CG in my anime over the traditional animation styles, but it's not bad here. Makes some of the fight scenes, which are also pretty well put together, easier to follow than if it was a more janky style. Again, Berserk 2016. Okay, compliments are now done. I promise I will attempt a compliment sandwich with this, because I got a lot of complaints. The primary one, though, is that this isn't Trigun. Or rather, I should say if the goal was to remake Trigun, it fell into the same trap that the Hellraiser remake did on Hulu, when it tried to reimagine the original source material without really keeping the spirit of the original. Or in this particular case, just trying to be a straight-up adaptation of Trigun Maximum, which I argue it should have been. It basically falls into that area of remakes that you can really best classify as it tried to be its own thing, but ended up being a different story wearing the originals as a skin suit. Aside from the Hellraiser remake, I would also compare it to the RoboCop remake in that way. Now, I do need to go into a little bit more detail on this one, so what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to offer an apology to people who do like Trigun Stampede at the 8-minute mark here. This is probably where you guys should get off the ride, because a lot of the criticisms I have are vicious in their nature. So if you enjoyed Stampede, I will say that if you liked it, you will like the original quite a bit, if not more. Go watch it. It is an absolute recommendation. The original, like I said, is peak fiction. So, go watch it. Okay, that's enough of me being nice. It's time for me to be evil. So, Trigun Stampede is set on a different planet that's the same planet called No Man's Land, which is less interesting than being called Gunsmoke. And instead of following Meryl Streep and Millie Thompson as the representatives of the Bernardelli Insurance Society, we're following journalists... Wait, wasn't she a journalist at the end of Maximum? Why are they starting to... Anyway, journalist Meryl Streep and Roberto De Niro... Oh, come on! Okay, look. I can't do my normal spiel with this stuff. It's impossible for me. I can't do breakdowns of this. I just need to get straight to the problems, because there's a lot of them. Right out of the gate, the main issue I have with this series is that every change that they made to the story and characters took out the very soul of the original. When I mean they changed everything, I mean everything. The name of the planet they're on, the characterization of all the characters, the designs of all the characters, not to mention any mysteries that surround Vash and Knives, the planet, how they got there, and even the soundtrack is just generic now. Now, I know that some of these elements are going to change with a remake. I get that. But let's take a second to look at Vash from the original anime, and for the manga, of course, and then the current Vash the Stampede. Vash on the left gives you an idea of who he is, but you're only getting surface details. You wouldn't know that his arm is artificial. You wouldn't know he's from off-planet, or that he's not even human. You could tell he's kind of a sci-fi version of an Old West gunman, with a much more pleasant demeanor than Old Western characters like Rooster Cogburn or the Man with No Name. The Vash on the right, from Stampede, has no mystery. You can see the robotic arm. You can see he's wearing a jacket with the spaceship that people came to the planet in on the fucking sleeve. No subtlety whatsoever. He just kind of looks like a generic anime protagonist. They even took away his spiky hair. Which they still have Nicholas Wolfwood call him Needle Noggin. The nickname doesn't even make any fucking sense now. He doesn't have spiky hair. Ugh. Not to mention, Vash in Stampede feels like a cut-down version of himself as a character. In fact, I feel like if you compare the original's gun to the new version's gun, it's a perfect allegory. Vash's gun in the original is the AGL Arms 45 caliber long Colt. It is a monster of a revolver, which in the show is actually powerful enough to blow a man's limb off, or redirect a massive spinning fist away from a crowd of people. Vash's skill with it, on top of the fact that he never kills anyone with a revolver with that much firepower, is a big part of his character and tells you something about him. The new Vash's revolver is a .22. I'm reminded of the old hefty garbage bag commercials with the whole hefty, wimpy, wimpy thing. But that's what the new Vash is. He's a wimp. Yeah, he doesn't want to hurt anyone, so he runs away, but you don't really see his willingness to plant his heels and stand up when he needs to much later in the series. Even then, there's no aura of seriousness around him whenever he needs to stand up to someone. He's absolutely unwilling to fight when he absolutely should so that he can save lives. He is a wuss. Vash in the original only had his wimpiness as a veil for who he really was, a gunman. Vash the Stampede as a character in the original could be summed up in 2 quotes. The first one is from Keanu Reeves, where he had said in an interview that he doesn't want to live in a world where kindness and gentleness can't be seen as a strength. The other one is the paraphrasing of John Stuart Mill's inaugural address at the University of St. Andrews in 1867, which is, the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. This new Vash fits the first quote, but not the second, because he often finds himself doing nothing or running away. In fact, he barely does anything in the fucking show, and there are points where people are getting killed around him. He just doesn't do anything about it. There's no moments where you get the feeling that Vash is more skilled than what he lets on or anything like that. He does do a trick shot in episode 1 that honestly feels forced, because why the fuck would you have somebody from the July security force travel to where he is, first and foremost, and second, try to genocide a whole town when he'd have no proof that he actually killed Vash if he blew him to smithereens? Heck, none of the characters act like they did before, except for Meryl. Nicholas Wolfwood got most of his redeeming and charming qualities cut out, and now he's just a dick. Oh, they also spoil that he's one of the gung-ho guns almost immediately. It's another example of how there is next to no mystery or intrigue or subtlety in this show. The writing, honestly, is just dumbed down so much that it's infuriating. Nobody is interesting in this show, because the show just tells you what's going on. There's no subtle hints, no shadowy figures, no build-up to grand reveals, nothing. It's all just in your face all the time. Heck, Knives himself shows up in the 3rd fucking episode! What?! Also, he now has the superpower to create millions of knives. Also, Vash can create black holes or something. I hate this. I hate all of this. I hate every bit of it. Look, the best way I can sum it up is that this show's writing has no depth whatsoever. Instead of being clever like the original or the manga, it substitutes that cleverness from the source material, the complexity, and the subtlety for in-your-face constant noise. It even tries to present itself as darker than the original anime, and some people have told me that it's comparable to how dark Trigun Maximum got, but the thing is, I don't really think it's darker than the original. It's bloodier, but it's not darker. Let's go back to the episode called Diablo from the original series, which, again, one of the best episodes. It is, in my opinion, a perfect example of a Wham episode, if you know what that trope is. If not, go ahead and Google it. But there's a part of that story where Monev the Gale opens fire on dozens of buildings and civilians, slaughtering them, even though Vash is doing his best to save as many people as he can and get out of town so nobody gets hurt. After Monev slaughters them, the scene in the episode, honestly, wouldn't be any darker, at least in my opinion, if it was gorier. The implications of what just happened, the images that you see, Monev the Gale's cackling, the soundtrack, and then Vash's rage-filled yet quiet reaction to what happened is enough to give you an idea of how fucking serious it all is, and the turn that the show just took. By the way, speaking of Monev the Gale, they screwed him up too. Heck, they screwed up all of the gung-ho guns. Everyone's design got changed, and they all look worse. As I mentioned before, Monev the Gale went from being this Todd McFarlane-inspired monster, as I mentioned before, his name is Venom backwards, to this. What the fuck is this? Now his head is tiny and is a stupid mask that looks like it's ripped off of a shitty Call of Duty game. Yeah, I know that's not very specific, because the last time Call of Duty was good was around the last time that Family Guy was funny. He looks stupid! Also, they try to give him a personal connection to Vash, but in doing so, thinking they're being clever, they're being dumber because of the poor execution. It doesn't have the same impact that the original Monev the Gale did, because the Vash that goes into the episode is the same guy that leaves it. As opposed to when you get to the episode of Diablo in the anime, Vash starts changing. And it starts moving towards something that is huge and challenges Vash's very worldview and the thing that he's trying to do. Because Knives is trying to use the gung-ho guns to break him. There's none of that here. It's all taken out. Instead, all of the gung-ho guns are basically Bane. They take a version of Venom, which is supposed to further be the next step in human evolution. Can we get past that trope, please? It's getting annoying. It wasn't any better when everything else already used it. Stop that! Anyway, none of the characters look nearly as cool as they did in the manga or the original anime. Let's talk about the designs of the gung-ho guns and compare them. Here's Legato Blue Summers. On the left, he's a looming, intimidating presence. On the right, in Stampede, he looks like the lost member of My Chemical Romance. Here's E.G. Mine, who now looks over-designed as hell, but admittedly at least had an interesting execution in the story, making him a mad bomber. Here's Zazie the Beast, who is now blatantly a bug. Here's Alendera, the Crimson Nail, who is now a lolly, who actually shows up in the nude in the show. Yeah, it's making me wonder if the creator of this version of this is a moderator at Reset Era, or one of those creeps on Twitter trying to ruin The Witch from Mercury by fantasizing about underage girls having sex. Anyway, enough creeping you out. Here's Livio the Double Fang, who instead of looking like on the left, where he's this cool, awesome Western gunman, now he just looks like your average anime villain with fancy guns. If you showed me the Stampede image and you said it was a villain from a shonen like My Hero Academia or Jujutsu Kaisen, I would completely believe you. The original designs honestly had much more life to them, much more that set them apart. Granted, like I hinted at earlier, but for those who don't know, Yasuhiro Naito is a big Todd McFarlane fan on top of being a Spider-Man fan and Western comic book fan. Because he's inspired especially by 90s comic books, which had a lot of great designs, especially the stuff that McFarlane was doing at the time, that inspiration coming over to what he was doing really enhanced his designs, and honestly, by putting them in a Western sci-fi style story, it ended up looking so much better than what we're getting now. Because let's be honest, 90s comic books, just a lot of them had really cool designs. Instead of getting that spaghetti Western sci-fi, this is just a generic sci-fi series. There's no blend here. The music of the show doesn't feature any interesting guitar work to set moods or anything like that. It's just generic epic symphony that blends in with the furniture. The opening song in the original is this great guitar track called HT, which of course stands for Humanoid Typhoon, and it's just this great way to get you hyped up for the show. In this one, it's generic soft J-pop. There's never moments where you can just drink in the atmosphere. It feels like the show is just trying to shove you along to the next big set piece instead of giving each moment a good setup and time to breathe. The finale was a giant letdown as well. They have this epic battle in the city of July that decimates it, but the battle honestly felt considerably less impactful than what happened to July in the original. A lot of this has to do with the fact that they completely took out any impact that Rem Savernum had in the original, in the fact that she was an influence on Vash's morality, or just her in general. She's barely even in this. And then they absolutely fucking ruined Million's knives, too. Instead of him being this absolute bastard who's looking to break his brother to try to bring him over to his way of thinking, they try to force this whole fucking thing of him thinking that plants are some sort of master race, and you have to choose either one or the other. When I don't remember Knives ever really having that much of a relationship with the plants. I know that he uses that as an excuse in the manga, but he ends up killing all of them at the end. Spoilers. So he ends up being a giant hypocrite. This one is just a Hitler clone that's just a dime a dozen one at that, with a pregnancy fetish. Yeah, that scene in the last episode is just fucking weird. Not to mention, what the fuck is with this hood? What the fuck is with this design? Why are his powers so different from Vash's when they're twin brothers? Why does Vash at the very end of the series get the angel arm, but Knives doesn't? What's the fucking point of this? Like, it's stupid looking! I've been going on for ages now. This video is already almost a half hour long. I feel like I'm going on too long with it, even though there is more I could say here. I honestly feel like I should just wrap it up. The reason I brought up the Avril Lavigne trying to cover Metallica at the start of the video is because that's the best way I could describe Trigun Stampede. It is remaking something that was timeless and tried to make it more modern. But by making it more modern or more in line with the anime equivalent of pop music, you strip it of everything that made it special, instead making it flavorless and generic. It's like taking a New York strip, and instead of reverse searing it and properly seasoning it to have this tender, flavorful, medium rare steak, you instead put it in a meat grinder and made a cheap hamburger out of it. Everything that worked well from the start is now gone, substituted for something else that's just something you could get anywhere. Okay, I guess I'll try the compliment sandwich here and try to say something positive. I'm of the opinion that if the show wasn't called Trigun, and instead it was a brand new series with new characters with similar designs, I think I would probably like this a lot more. But you called it Trigun, and Trigun is something that doesn't really need to be remade. Maybe expanded upon with an actual flat-out adaptation of Maximum, but it didn't need to be remade. As of right now, because of the fact that you're trying to remake it, you put yourself in a position where you're just not able to match up to the original whatsoever, or even have your own voice because of that. It's unfortunate, because you can actually tell that the team who worked on this did work hard. I just feel like trying to make something fit into modernity is silly, because you miss the timeless elements that made the original Trigun so special. On the flip side, I always say that the originals, whenever they're remade, never really go anywhere, because they don't. Trigun will always be a classic. And if you've never watched the original anime, you need to. Like Cowboy Bebop, like Berserk, like Devilman, like Battle Angel Alita. The original Trigun is peak fiction. I think if they ever animate the show again, just do a straight-up adaptation of Maximum instead of whatever the hell Stampede was. Alright folks, if you enjoyed this video, I appreciate you watching. Hit that like button, hit subscribe. Anyway, ways to support the channel are in the subscription, and of course, my current comic books that are on Indiegogo. Well, one comic book and one novella. My novella, American Monsters, is almost at 1,000 USD, only $250 away. And then, of course, we have a stretch goal that's available for that. If you have not backed it yet, please do so. Plus, 3 Nights, 4 Days, Part 2. If you missed out on the first book, you can pick that up as well. If you're a horror fan, if you're a dark fantasy fan, you will enjoy that. Alright, folks, on that note, I am going to go ahead and take off. My name is Micah Curtis, your favorite vanilla gorilla. Thanks so much for watching, and have yourselves a good one.